Dear Taurus, this isn't merely a warning, it's a heartfelt call to awareness. Two individuals are approaching you, but they don't come wielding weapons or shouting threats. Instead, they arrive with an air of reliability, offering what seems like solid ground. However, after each interaction, you may find yourself feeling a little more unsettled, a little less grounded. You don't sense an outright attack, but rather an insidious erosion of the stability you've worked so hard to build. This is the first trap to recognize. This message is not meant to instill fear, but to illuminate the truth about those who may be quietly undermining your foundation. The universe, or the steadfastness you've cultivated through countless lifetimes, has brought you to this moment of clarity. In the next sections, I will reveal who is subtly weakening your stability, the tactics they employ to keep you in the role of the one who always sacrifices their own peace, and most importantly, how to reclaim the territory of your soul that has been surrendered without your true consent. If you're hesitant to continue, listen closely. Some individuals don't wish to harm you. They simply don't want you to build your fortress too high. It's time to uncover the truth your soul has always known. Take a deep breath and let part 1 guide you back to your core foundation. There are threats that don't announce their presence with loud noises or harsh words. They enter your life with sincere-sounding encouragement, asking seemingly innocent questions at just the right moment. Their presence feels safe, yet every time you find yourself near them, a piece of your foundation quietly erodes, almost imperceptibly. They don't criticize you or betray you overtly. Instead, they plant seeds of doubt, suggesting you might be overly stubborn, that your stability is boring, or that your need for security is holding others back. As a result, you abandon the very routines that bring you peace. And that is the first trap. You once believed that danger stemmed from overt hostility, but the truth is that the souls who endure the deepest wounds are often not hated. They are made to feel that living authentically is a burden. Taurus, you are a being who builds your life with patience and certainty. You don't need empty promises, you need tangible security, visible stability, and peace in the world you create. Because you value harmony and want to keep things from being disrupted, you often take a step back, compromising your own rules and setting aside personal projects to avoid conflict. But this kind of loyalty, which leads you away from your steadfast nature, is not genuine loyalty. It is a form of manipulation, cloaked in concern. You may have heard this in various teachings. The adversary doesn't always come with horns and fire. Sometimes they arrive with a smile and a piece of advice. In Buddhist philosophy, this concept is termed subtle defilement, those invisible attachments that take root in your mind, clouding your perception until you can no longer see your own core values. I once spoke with a Taurus man in his 50s. His eyes were heavy with unspoken fatigue, and his voice had lost its usual calm. He shared how he had always been the reliable one, the one who knew how to maintain stability for his family. Yet one day, he looked back and realized he could no longer recognize himself. "I've built many houses," he said, "but I've never truly lived peacefully in my own." His tears fell not for anyone else, but for the self he had lost. Can you relate to this? How many times have you given up a habit that grounds you just to please someone else? How many plans have you postponed, not because you couldn't achieve them, but out of fear that your consistency might make someone else feel stuck? This sacrifice doesn't stem from weakness. It arises from a loyalty so profound that it forgets itself. But dear Taurus, true love will never ask you to abandon your sacred foundation just to survive. There is a lesson that healing souls must eventually learn. Safety is not always synonymous with goodness. There are embraces that silence your inner voice, and people who you feel grateful to have by your side. But only if you abandon what makes you feel secure so they won't leave. Warmth is not always synonymous with love. Sometimes it's merely a heavy blanket that smothers the fire within you, making you forget how steady you once were before someone convinced you that you were too rigid. I share this not to cast blame, but to remind you, to help you remember that you once felt free, that your soul was once steady, not to be recognized, but simply because it was true. Remember that you once were the architect of your own life, rather than merely maintaining peace in someone else's narrative. You once made yourself more flexible than you were comfortable with, so someone else wouldn't feel lost beside your consistency. But today, you no longer have to do that. Place your hand over your heart for a moment. Reflect on the last time you compromised. What was it for? Who was it for? Not everyone wishes to harm you, but some will choose to keep you unsettled because your stability shines a light on their own unresolved issues. They don't want you to disappear. They simply don't want you to build higher than they can. Taurus, you are a sign of the earth, carrying the strength of patience and the power to create. You don't just feel, you build. Because of this, you forgive easily, provide readily, and carry responsibilities that were never yours. However, there comes a time when that loyalty transforms from a virtue into a trap, keeping you in the role of the provider even when you are the one most in need of being secured. Your soul was not born to compromise indefinitely. You didn't come here to be loved only in your moments of instability. You don't have to hide your peace just to prevent someone from feeling left behind. You can love them and choose yourself simultaneously. You are not wrong for loving deeply, but you are now being asked, will you dare to love yourself with that same steadfastness if your heart is trembling in silence, if you feel your foundation shaking with every nod and every whispered, "It's okay"? Know this, you are not crazy. You are not confused. You are beginning to see, and once you start to see, you can never unsee. But this is only the first face of the truth. There is another individual who not only made you doubt yourself, but also instilled a sense of gratitude even while they were taking pieces of your peace away. This realization can be frightening. If these words resonate with you, gently write beneath this video as a sacred ritual of awakening, "I choose to stand on my own ground." This is not merely a comment. It is the first door you open to return to yourself. What comes next will reveal the identity of the second person, not an enemy, not a stranger, but someone you once believed was essential to your survival. Yet, you lived, you began to rebuild your world, and they quietly faded away. Have you ever experienced this "keep walking with me"? For what follows will not just be a story. It will serve as a mirror for all those who have lost themselves in loyalty and are now learning to love themselves without sacrificing their stability any longer. There exists a certain type of person who doesn't come to harm you. They come to admire you. They lean on your stability, drawn to you because your sense of peace helps them feel safe. Initially, this dynamic feels beautiful and pure. You may have believed you were helping someone find shelter. However, as time passes, something begins to shift. It's not that they disappear. Rather, you start to disappear from your own life. Every conversation with them makes you feel trusted, yet leaves you feeling unsettled afterward. Each compliment they offer about your steadfastness feels precious, but when you attempt to take a step forward for yourself, something invisible pulls you back. You might think, maybe I'm being selfish, but the truth is, you are not selfish. You are simply being depleted of your resources without even realizing it. They didn't arrive with swords. They came bearing praise. And it was that sweetness that lowered your defenses. You began to build less, plan less, dream less. Not because your dreams had vanished, but because you feared that if you built your fortress too high, someone else might feel left behind. You loved them, and you didn't want them to feel lesser, so you quietly pulled yourself in. Dear Taurus, you are not alone in this experience. Many souls inhabit smaller spaces just to avoid making others feel insecure with their stability. In doing so, they forget that their stability is meant not only to shelter others, but is, in fact, an intrinsic part of who they are. I once walked alongside a Taurus woman who shared that her ex-husband had always told her she was special, that her calmness inspired him, that she was extraordinary until she truly began to grow, succeed, and become unshakable. Then, he became restless, jealous, and began to quietly criticize her for being too rigid. She found herself undermining her own foundation to maintain peace in the marriage. One day, she realized she no longer recognized the feeling of her own inner peace. They came to lean on your stability, not out of malice, but because they had not yet learned to connect with their own foundation. Instead of finding their way back inward, they chose to survive on someone else's shelter. In Buddhist teachings, this phenomenon is referred to as dependent origination. The individuals who enter our lives are not always sent by love. Often, they are drawn to us through the overlapping waves of past karma. Incomplete souls are frequently attracted to those who have traversed many layers of chaos and built a fortress of peace. However, the key point here is this: they didn't come to heal with you. They came so that you would shelter them. Even in sacred texts, it is said that not everyone who calls upon the divine will enter the realm of true understanding. Only those who align with higher principles will find their way. Not everyone who expresses love, offers praise, or remains close is genuinely walking beside you. Some may sit near, yet their focus is directed elsewhere. You once believed that if you built too strong, they would leave, so you stopped building. But here's the truth: if someone truly loves you, they will stay by your side even as you build your empire. They won't feel trapped. They will learn to build alongside you. You don't need to dismantle your foundation to be loved. You are loved precisely because of that foundation. Try to remember Was there ever a moment when you quietly tucked away a project simply because it felt too grand for the world around you? Did you ever whisper to yourself, "It can wait," as long as you didn't make anyone uncomfortable? Did you ever hide a gift, a talent, or a joy because others couldn't do the same? You called that understanding, but deep down, you were slowly disappearing. You were not born to live within someone else's confines. You are Earth. You are a foundation, and no one can stand on you forever without finding their own ground. The second individual didn't arrive with accusations. They didn't make you feel wrong. Instead, they made you feel needed. Yet, as you stepped closer to your true strength, they began to withdraw, not with noise or anger, but simply by being absent. Within you, a question begins to simmer, not loud, not fully formed, but quietly persistent. Did I do something wrong? The answer is no. You did nothing wrong. You simply began to live in truth, and they didn't know how to cope with that. Now that you no longer rely on their approval, they don't harbor hatred. They need you to remain in one place so they can feel larger. This is the deepest wound, not hatred, but conditional love, the kind that makes you feel guilty for daring to grow. This love fills you with gratitude, yet also caution. It requires you to sacrifice your essence to hold on to someone, all while you are the one being left behind. I urge you to write this down, not for engagement, but because your soul needs to hear this declaration. My stability is for building, not for binding. This is a profound affirmation, not because you don't need anyone, but because you are beginning to remember that you are the foundation, not to be contained, but to be expanded. If someone truly loves you, they will learn to embrace your strength, not just love you in your moments of chaos. What follows will evoke a memory you thought had long faded, the memory of someone who once was your anchor, but vanished when you began to sail on your own. The one who promised to always be there, but isn't now, simply because you are no longer as lost as you once were. In this realization, you understand that not every promise is born of love. Some are merely ways to keep you close when you aren't strong enough to walk away. The trap is not external. It resides in the memories you mistook for love. Not everyone who remained by your side during your suffering deserves a place in your journey of rising. This is a silent truth that can be difficult to accept, but it is a door you must walk through if you wish to live a life free from compromise. You once called them your refuge, the one who stayed when your world was in chaos, the one who wiped your tears and sat in silence with you on nights when you didn't know why you were still trying, because they were there during your most vulnerable moments. You naturally believed they were destined to walk with you into every chapter that followed. You thought, if they didn't leave when I had nothing, surely they will rejoice when I finally have everything. Yet something strange began to happen. Each time you felt a little more peaceful, their gaze shifted. Each time your smile grew brighter, their presence turned colder. Every time you spoke of a plan coming to fruition, the conversation fell flat, no longer supportive, but marked by a distant fog you couldn't quite name. As a sensitive Taurus, you sensed these shifts deeply. You felt the absence lurking beneath their presence, the hollowness behind their congratulations. You could feel it even when they said, I'm happy for you. A part of them was quietly stepping back, and you began to blame yourself. Have I changed? Have I left them behind? Am I being ungrateful to the one who was my anchor in the storm? This is the trap, not a trap in the external world, but one that resides in memories you mistook for love. Love is not always love. Sometimes it is a bond forged in shared pain, sustained only by the most fragile versions of ourselves. Some people will love you deeply as long as you don't grow beyond them. They are not bad, they do not intend to harm you. However, their own instability makes them feel secure only when you remain unsettled. When you begin to heal and become stable, they no longer recognize themselves in you. Instead of rising alongside you, they retreat. The Buddha once said there is no love in attachment, only delusion. Keeping someone tied to you through pain is not true love. In sacred texts, we are reminded that the truth shall set you free even from what you once believed was love. These words are gentle, yet powerful enough to shake the oldest bonds. Those who were with us at the beginning are not always meant to accompany us to the end, not because they betrayed us, but because they are no longer aligned with the stability you now radiate. Have you ever felt this? You achieved what you once dreamed of, yet instead of receiving an enthusiastic embrace, you were met with a half-hearted nod. You shared your success, and their eyes dimmed, even though their words remained kind. You began to thrive, and the one who stood by you during your darkest days quietly turned away. The truth is, they loved you, but only in your most fragile state. When you began to stand on your own, no longer needing anyone to carry your pain, they couldn't see their place beside you anymore. Their presence had once been tied to your suffering. Now that you've healed, that bond begins to fade. Some people cannot bear your true light, not because it is too bright, but because they are not yet ready to confront their own darkness. Your stability illuminates the parts of them they prefer to forget, making them feel exposed. They step back, not out of hatred, but because they are not yet strong enough to walk this path with you. You find yourself at a crossroads between loyalty to the past and honesty with the present, between gratitude for someone who once stayed and the understanding that they are no longer truly present. I once heard a Taurus say, "I used to hide my joy because I was afraid they'd feel left behind." That one sentence left me in silence for a long time, for it signifies that you once compromised your sacred foundation to ensure someone else wouldn't feel hurt. But a foundation has no obligation to crumble because others are unprepared. A foundation cannot remain weak just to keep others comfortable. Dear Taurus, you don't need to shrink to be kept. Perhaps in this very moment, you're wearing a soft, almost weightless smile, yet deep down, you know you've been cautious in sharing your true desires, cautious in dreaming bigger, cautious in allowing your inner light to glow again. You may fear that someone might quietly step away if you build your fortress too high. If you find yourself resonating with this, know that you are not alone. Many souls have traversed this fracture, the realization that relationships that once saved you can also be the ones that hold you back. Those who once comforted you may become the shadow that prevents you from moving forward. Love, once a blazing fire, can transform into an old cloak warm but heavy. You do not need to remain in a space simply because it once felt safe. You are allowed to walk away, not out of ingratitude or heartlessness, but because you have grown. When your soul expands, some connections will no longer fit. This is not a tragedy. It is nature. If your heart is quietly nodding in agreement right now, perhaps you are beginning to sense that something is shifting. To mark this awakening with a small, sacred gesture, consider writing down a gentle affirmation: I am ready to shed the old cloak of conditional relationships. This is not about turning your back, but returning to yourself. The trap was never out there in the world. It resides within the stories you once told yourself about love, loyalty, and staying simply because someone once stayed for you. True love does not bind you to past pain. It does not fear your healing. True love will not abandon you simply because you are becoming radiant. Prepare yourself, for what comes next is not just another chapter. It is the map the universe is quietly placing in your hands before you unknowingly turn away from a destiny that has carried your name since before you were born. This map makes no noise. It arrives like a gentle breeze, lingering in the quiet chambers of your heart. It carries no flares, no obvious signs, only a knowing that you can no longer live as you once did. When that realization dawns, you won't be able to return, for a true foundation refuses to be compromised ever again. There are days when you feel exhausted and you can't quite explain why. It's not your work, not the weather, but the weight of having lived too long without being truly grounded in yourself. You navigate through days, weeks, months, whispering soft affirmations just to keep someone else comfortable. You delay your plans, shrink back from what feels right, speak softly, and walk slowly so that no one feels left behind. Then one day, you realize the one most left behind was you. You are no longer the person who once lit up at what she loved, the one who wrote wishes at midnight, or the one who gazed into the mirror and saw a flicker of magic in her eyes. Regardless of the world outside, you start to feel yourself fading, not because someone extinguished your light, but because you tried to shrink to fit into someone else's world. Perhaps you once thought, if I become too stable, they'll leave. If I succeed too much, they'll feel small. If I speak my truth, they won't love me anymore. So, you remained quiet, waiting, folding yourself into a shape that felt more palatable, more acceptable, easier to live with. But dear Taurus, you were born to build, not to ask for permission. You no longer need to survive on someone's approval. You don't need a nod from anyone to take the next step. You don't need a compliment to validate your worth. You once thought, they love me, they're just not ready. But true love does not require someone to be ready. It arises when you are ready to love yourself. In Buddhist teachings, letting go is not about relinquishing love, it's about releasing attachment. In sacred texts, the divine does not plead doubt. It brings light so you may see the path and walk it boldly, not with another's legs, but with your own. You once compromised your stability to keep someone close, hiding your plans, your joy, the miracles within you, just to avoid causing pain. But do you see now, it's not the truth that hurts. It's the act of living against your soul, clinging to sweet conditional love, performing the role of the quiet, agreeable one, slowly suffocates your spirit. There were people who claimed to love you, and they did, but only when you were easy to love, when you didn't push back, didn't become too stable, didn't dream too big. When you began to love yourself, truly love yourself, when you stopped seeking to please everyone, when you ceased bending to maintain peace, they felt unnecessary and began to fade away. You may have felt guilty for becoming more honest, guilty for not needing guidance anymore, guilty for dreaming again. But the truth is, you did nothing wrong. You are simply coming home. Return to your soul without hiding. Return to your foundation without compromising. Return to the truth without seeking permission. Freedom does not mean that no one dislikes you. It means living in your truth without shrinking to fit someone else's world. You don't need praise to know you are worthy. You don't need agreement to live as your whole self. You were born to build, not to remain still, waiting for someone's approval. If you are still choosing safety over truth, if you are staying simply because it's familiar, if you are clinging to a relationship only because they were once there for you, take a deep breath. Just take one more step, one step to return to yourself. One step to open the door that no longer requires anyone else to hold the key. One step is enough for the light to return. If you find yourself standing at that threshold, gently admit that you have felt this shift. Perhaps the most beautiful way to acknowledge this is to write it down as a whisper to your soul. I no longer ask for permission to be myself. This doesn't require many words, just one sentence. But if it comes from truth, it will carry the power to set you free, like a soft breeze pushing open a door that hasn't been touched in years, like a fragile ray of light illuminating an entire room, like a single blink that marks the moment you begin to see clearly. You don't have to walk quickly. You only need to rise in truth. That is enough. Because this is what the universe is whispering into your heart. This is what your soul prepared to confront long ago. Before you leave, I want you to hold on to one truth. You don't have to become smaller for someone to love you more. You don't have to lock yourself in a tiny version of who you once were to match your past. You are a foundation, and a foundation does not ask for permission to exist. If your heart has just awakened, if your throat feels tight, because something deeply true has finally found its voice, then perhaps today is the first day you stop living for permission and begin to live for the quiet truth that you have chosen yourself. Dear Taurus, perhaps what hurt you most wasn't the truth itself, but how long you've had to live as if you didn't know it. You smiled while your heart grew silent. You bowed your head to maintain peace, even as your soul shattered into pieces. You remained in relationships that made your spirit shrink, all because of an old promise. But now, let this be the end. You don't have to shrink again. You don't have to strain to make someone stay. You don't need to ask for permission to live in your truth. This is the moment, the space, where you no longer return to your old self, but haven't fully stepped into the new one either. There is only one certainty: your soul has just unlocked itself. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with your whole heart, not seeking proof, not requiring reason, just feeling If something within you has just been set free, gently write it down as a mark of this sacred moment. I have chosen myself, and this time I will not go back. Wishing you, keeper of the Taurus heart, a journey ahead that no longer requires you to shrink or forces you to stay silent just to be loved, but allows you to live fully as you are, a soul destined to build and to thrive. I will see you again on the next path of light.